Good morning, everyone. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Gracious God, you know us and love us and call us each by name. Open our ears and our minds and our hearts and our histories that we might be led by your Spirit into your love. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Many of you were here last night and had the joy of spending some time with Dr. Catherine Meeks, and it's my honor to welcome her back again this morning. I called a friend after we were finished last night and said, you won't believe it, not only was Dr. Meeks here last night, but she's coming back again next morning. I had to pinch myself. It's hard to believe, but we're grateful, Dr. Meeks. If you were not here last night, you perhaps didn't hear that Dr. Meeks is the executive director of the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing, which is located in Atlanta. She is a longtime teacher and speaker and leader, and we are glad to have her. Thank you. Let's welcome Dr. Meeks.
Thank you. Thank you. So can everyone hear me in the back? Okay, great. Good morning. It is good to be with you again. And if you were not here last night, let me just say very briefly that I talked about the outer journey in relationship to racial healing last night and promised to talk about the inner journey today. It is an inner-outer journey, which we miss understanding, I think, a lot of the time. I want to begin by reading a little piece from John O'Donohue's book, To Bless the Space Between Us. And by the way, the title for this talk was Let Your Heart Not Be Troubled. And the title and the talk this morning really want to get at how do we get past being fearful and having a troubled heart when it comes to racial healing? How do we get to a place where we can walk on the journey with a sense of assuredness and peacefulness? Because that is the way God wants us to live in the world. We make a difference when we go out into the world as people of peace and people who are not afraid. We bring a message in this time of fear and lack of peace everywhere on our globe. This poem is called Bless the Morning, a Morning Offering, excuse me. And I want to read the whole thing, but the last two verses are the ones that I'm particularly wanting to focus on. I bless the night that nourished my heart to set the ghost of longing free into the flow and figure of dream, that went to harvest from the dark, bread for the hunger no one sees. All that is eternal in me welcomes the wonder of this day, the field of brightness it creates, offering time for each thing to arise and illuminate. I place on the altar of dawn the quiet loyalty of breath, the tent of thought where I shelter waves of desire, I am sure too, and all beauty drawn to the eye. And these are the two stanzas that I'm most interested in talking about. May my mind come alive today to the invisible geography that invites me to new frontiers, to break the dead shell of yesterdays, to risk being disturbed and changed. May I have the courage today to live the life that I would love, to postpone my dream no longer, but do at last what I came here for and waste my heart on fear no more. May my mind come alive today to the invisible geography that invites me to new frontiers, to break the dead shell of yesterdays, to risk being disturbed and changed. May I have the courage today to live the life that I would love, to postpone my dream no longer, but do at last what I came here for and waste my heart on fear no more. It is so easy for us to waste our hearts on fear, all of us, because every time we turn around, there's an invitation to be afraid everywhere, in the news, in conversations. We have to worry about the environment. We've got to worry about everything. And if you didn't find something to worry about, then you need to worry that you're not worrying. I mean, because it's just got to be this unsettledness about life, you know. If people will accuse you of being Pollyanna because you're not worrying, and that's very unfortunate. God's people have been promised that God will be with us and God will take care of us. There is not a promise that we won't have hardship, that things may not go the way we want them to go, but there is the promise that God will always be there. Carl Jung, who's somebody I've spent a lot of time studying, had a sign over his door that said, "Called or not called, God is present." God is always present. If we believe that, if we live into that and walk that way, then we can have the capacity to take a good look at the stuff we need to look at. And one of the things that we need to take a good look at is, what is the community that lives inside of us? Who are the players in our inner community? Because when we start trying to work with the outer community, a lot of what we encounter in the outer community is a replication of stuff that's inside of us. So if we go out into the world and we find people that are disgruntled, people that are fearful, people that are happy, people that are encouraging, we've got all those parts inside of ourselves. If you can think about walking around with a little community going on inside of your head and inside of yourself. And the way you think about that is to think about all the different stuff you think. All the different thoughts you have represent parts of yourself. You know, the part that is generous, but the part that's stingy. The part that is hopeful, but the part that's afraid. We are a combination of all of that. And in the way that we get to the point that our hearts are not troubled, the way that we get to the point that we can live with peacefulness and hopefulness and being empowered, is to confront all of those parts of ourselves. So there are no surprises. So I'm not surprised when I hear myself saying something that's not too nice about somebody, because I know that's one of my community members speaking in my head. And I need to deal with my community member rather than trying to deal with the person out there that I'm projecting onto. So there is this big psychological term called projection. And projection, some of you know, some of you may not know, means that you have these things in your head that you assign to other people. So if you need to lose weight and you don't want to go on a diet, you really don't want to do this hard work, so you worry about trying to get everybody else you know to worry about their weight. You know, you become a great proponent of weight loss, but you're not doing it yourself. So you're trying to put onto other people something that you need to deal with yourself. So you get it, how projection works. Projection has always worked that way in terms of oppression. That the oppressors projected things onto the folks that they oppressed. A lot of stuff out of themselves was put onto people. And so I want you, if you don't take anything else away from this talk today, to take away from it the importance of paying attention to your own inner community and to pay attention to what it is you're after when you go out into the world to do something. We go out into the world sometimes thinking we're just good people, but actually we go out into the world doing good because there's something in us that requires us to do it. It's when we can claim our own understanding of what is, to the answer to the question of what is it that I'm after? Why am I out here trying to do this? What is that about? What does it have to do with me? See, I think that we don't talk enough about how you're supposed to get to be who we say you're supposed to be. We say you're supposed to be forgiving as people of faith. You're supposed to be loving. You're supposed to be caring about the poor. But if you don't care about parts of yourself that you feel poorly about, it's going to be difficult to care about the poor, because you're busy disparaging parts of yourself that then you can project onto somebody else. So do you understand how that works? That you're walking around carrying these these shadow qualities, Jung would call it, these things that are not quite apparent to you. Shadow, a shadow, you can kind of see it, but you can't tell what it is. You kind of know. If you see a shadow of a dog, you kind of know it's not a person. You might not know it's you'll know it's a dog and not a cat, but you won't know what kind of dog just from seeing the shadow. So the shadow qualities in our community, in our inner community, don't always become so apparent to us unless we start paying attention to what kind of conversations are we having with ourselves about things that we don't know anything about. When you're driving down the road and you see somebody in a car and you start talking about who they must be and what their life must be like and how did they get that fancy car and blah, 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 that is all in your own head. You don't know anything about that person. And so when you catch yourself saying, well, they must have thought so-and-so, then you're talking about yourself. Because we don't know what somebody else thought. We do it all the time, right? We do this all the time. We make these projections. We assign information and things to people thinking that we have made this great analysis and we know what we're talking about. But in fact, what we are doing is talking about ourselves. So if you catch yourself saying what somebody thought or what somebody's done and you don't know that person, then just tell yourself, oh, let me see, go inside and take a look at yourself. There is a lovely line from the book, and their eyes were watching God. I don't know why I wanted to say calling God. Their eyes were watching God. Zora Neale Hurston's lovely book. There's a wonderful scene in that book where Janie, who is slapped in the face by her husband, Jody, and she says, something fell off the shelf inside of me, and it was my image of Jody. And I knew then that I had an inside and an outside, and I would never mix them up again. So we need to go inside and interrogate what's inside of us, because what is inside of us helps to maintain a lot of the stuff that's outside, because we project. We keep the patterns going because we are not dealing with the stuff inside of ourselves that would help to set us free. The only way we can work for real liberation externally is to be liberated internally. And the work of the church is to liberate the heart. That is the church's work. But how do you liberate the heart? You can't just tell people to be liberated. We do that all the time. Be forgiving, and you don't have a clue how to do it. Be loving, and you don't know what does that mean? How am I supposed to love that person over there that I don't even want them to be on the planet? How am I supposed to figure that out? Part of how we figure that out is to go inside of ourselves and ask ourselves, what is it about that person that I would like to send off to Mars? What is it about them that is a reflection of some part of myself? Because generally when somebody's running you really crazy, if you take a look at yourself, you will find out that there is something in you that you're either not accepting and looking at, or there's something in you that's so like them that you don't want to deal with. And so you just project, and they make you crazy. I know, because I've spent a lot of my life working on my own projections and what it is that I need to learn from these folks that I really want to put on a spaceship. When you catch yourself wanting to put somebody on a spaceship, ask yourself, what has this got to do with me? That's a good way to begin to find out who lives in your inner community. The inner community, which we don't hardly talk about, I don't hear a lot of conversations, particularly not in Episcopal circles, about this idea. But this community has such a great impact upon what kind of work we're going to go out into the world to do. And if you're going out into the world unconscious about who you take out into the world, it's not a good thing. When you go out to do something, you need to know who you're taking. You need to know what are my own community members inside of myself doing? And how do they interact with me? How am I living out these parts of myself that I don't care too much about? I think that when people sometimes go out with such zeal to fix poor people or other people, any other poor people, black people, gay people, whoever you have on the end of your spectrum, that it's got a whole lot to do with your own community. And if you don't ask those questions and if you don't know those things, you do harm to yourself and to the folks that you're trying to help. Maybe that's part of the reason why some of the stuff we do just doesn't work too well. Because instead of really understanding what we're trying to do, we think we're trying to fix something out there, and we're really trying to fix something in here. And if we know that, it makes the whole enterprise different. It empowers us in a different kind of way. And it also keeps us from being caught in the setup of, if I go out there and try to work with poor folks because I've got a poor person inside of me that needs to be looked after. I've got a part of myself that I just don't want to deal with, and that person needs to be loved and taken care of, but I'm not trying to do that because that's too hard. So let me go work with somebody under the bridge. And the person under the bridge rejects me, then I'm in way big trouble because I wasn't going with the right understanding in the first place. So I grew up in Arkansas and with a sharecropping father. I grew up here, this state, up in the northeastern part of the state, with a sharecropping father and a mother an illiterate sharecropping father, and a mother who graduated from college the same year that I graduated from high school. My mother graduated from college when I graduated from high school, so she'd gone to college 18 years because there was no place to just go to school for her. And I was taught both by overt narrative and covert narrative that I wasn't supposed to be free, that I wasn't supposed to be liberated, that I wasn't supposed to be this person sitting here on this stage talking to you. That was the message from the culture. That was the subtle reinforced message from my family. Be careful, don't get into trouble, don't be too big in the world, because if you're too big in the world, something bad might happen to you. And there are all kinds of reasons for that we don't have time to get into. But I know that I've got this little imprisoned person that isn't sure that freedom is a good thing. And every now and again, she really acts up and tries to get me off the path. So I do two things. The first thing I've done is gone to work in prisons, because in being in a prison, working with folks that really don't have any external freedom, it helps me to deal with my internal prisoners. Does that make sense? But I know what I'm doing. I know that the person I visit enjoys my visiting, but I'm not visiting just for him. I'm visiting for myself and for him. I'm trying to get my own self out of prison, and he gets to enjoy the journey. That is different from thinking I'm such a good person. I mean, I might be pretty good, I don't know, but that's beside the point. That is beside the point. The point is to be conscious, so I know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And then the other thing I have to be is a good mother to that little scared girl. So when she starts acting up and saying, "Oh, are you sure you want to go on that next trip? You don't think anybody really wants to hear what you have to say?" I have to say to her, "Be quiet. Yes, I know what I'm doing. You don't have to be freaked out. You're going to be taken care of." You see how you interact with these parts of yourself that want to undermine you and get you off the path. Parts of and you can get in touch with this by paying attention to what you're thinking. I mean, it's not just random thoughts, it's different parts of yourself speaking to you. It's shadow stuff wanting to be made conscious, because human beings do want to be conscious. I do believe at least God wants us to be conscious. So God is always pushing us in the direction of waking up and knowing what's going on instead of living with our heads in the sand. The culture tells us we should live with our heads in the sand. It's better if you don't know, or this is the answer, never mind what the question is. That's the culture. But God says, find out what the question is, and then search for the answer. Search until you find an answer to that question, and not to some made-up kind of thing. That this notion of not paying attention to our inner community has helped us to keep racism intact. It has helped us to keep ourselves from being truly well when it comes to race, because we don't want to deal with this internal stuff that's hanging us up day after day. So it keeps white people ready to stay committed to white supremacy. It keeps black people connected to being having internalized depression, because we get comfortable in those spaces. So we know this is the space, and we just let ourselves fit in it, and then we make up whatever stories we need to make to support the position that we're following. If we are interested in liberation, then we have to ask hard questions. We have to pay attention to these internal processes, and we have to be willing to be disturbed. We have to risk being disturbed if we don't want to have troubled hearts and live in fear. That there is a remedy for the troubled, fearful heart, and it is consciousness. It is waking up and knowing what is going on. When I was a little kid, if I heard a noise in the house, and I'm still that way, I would go and investigate until I found out the cause of it, because I wasn't planning on being scared to death. And you could sit in the room and decide that there were monsters from Mars in your house, or you could go see that a book fell off the shelf. But we make up the monsters, we let the monsters from Mars run us into the ground without investigating what is the real nature. Most of the stuff that our hearts are troubled about and that we worry about never even happens. You think about it, how much stuff you've worried about, and how much energy you've spent on it, and how much of it didn't ever happen. And while we were busy worrying about the stuff that didn't ever happen, we missed a whole bunch of opportunities to do some things that we needed to do. A lot of people in some religious communities like to talk a lot about evil or the devil, and I know Episcopalians don't talk about that kind of stuff very much, and I don't either. But what I do believe is that evil is real, and I believe that evil's greatest ploy for people like us is distraction, to keep us distracted. And when we don't pay attention to the workings of our inner community and the shadow stuff that I'm talking about, we get distracted from what God has got in front of us, because we get into projections and a whole bunch of talking about stuff that we don't really know what we're talking about. It's just all stuff in our heads that we haven't really interrogated very well, and we get distracted from being on the journey we were put here to be on. So I love what John O'Donohue is saying about being open to all of the possibilities that are out there for us, and learning to be at the point of not having to waste our hearts on fear, because it is waste. It is wasted energy. It is wasted time, and time is finite. So we need to get with that program. I'm 73, so I know that I was thinking this morning, so if I live to be 90, that's only 20 years from now. 93, that's only 20 years from now. That's not very long. So I don't have time to fool around. Really got to get with it and be on the path that is there to be on. So I want to read another poem to you in a second, and I want to stop in a minute because I want to leave enough time for us to talk together before we have to go for service at 11. But I want to just reiterate the importance of the inner community, and that the inner work, the inner exploration, the inner questioning has got to be done if we're ever really gonna do the kind of outer repairing work that needs to happen so that racism becomes a thing that does not exist in this country. We have been really good at times at going out to be activists and doing the outer work. We have been very poor at doing the inner work. And the outer work has not been what it could have been had we done the work in a different way, had we been more whole people. You know, it's interesting that we change laws and change things, and now people are trying to go back to where we used to be. So there were some steps that got missed, and there was some transformation that needed to happen that did not happen, so that the laws got changed, but it's like putting on a new dress when you come in from the cotton field without taking a shower. So you've got on a new dress, but you're still sweaty. So we tried to put some new dresses on the culture, and we didn't do the real deconstructing work that needed to happen, so the new dress doesn't hold. And we see it. I think that it's important for us not to keep doing what we used to do, since what we used to do didn't work. I mean, it's kind of like, what did they say? The insanity is continuing to do the same thing and getting the same results, but expecting something to change because you keep doing it. You just think if you do it better or faster, or if you put more money into it, it's all crazy, because if it's not working, it's not working. And so the most important thing would be to stop and say, what do we need to do here? And that's a hard question, and it's a question that has to be answered person by person, I think. But it's important for people to be courageous enough to be asking, who am I? What makes me tick? What am I after? Who lives inside of this person? And what does this person have to do with what's going on out there in the world? Those questions have got to be engaged everywhere. Black, brown, white, whoever you happen to be, these are questions that you don't get to skip, because it's a part of the way that we get to be the whole, authentic people that God meant for us to be. I want to read a longer poem that I think summarizes so well how what I think the struggle is, the struggle between the inner and the outer. And this is called The Second Life, and it's by David White. And David White and John O'Donohue were great friends, in case you don't know, and I recommend them both to you. I think poetry is one of the best ways that we can get to some of this stuff. David White says poetry is a language against which there is no defense. And I love that notion, because we can defend ourselves so well. The ego is good at making up all kinds of stories to keep from dealing with the truth. My uncourageous life doesn't want to speak, doesn't want to carry on, wants to make its way through life, wants to assume the strange and dubious honor of not being heard. My uncourageous life doesn't want to move, doesn't even want to stir, wants to inhabit a difficult form of stillness, to pull everything into the silence where the throat strains but gives no voice. My uncourageous life wants to stop the world and keep it stopped, not only for itself but for everyone and everything it knows, refusing to stir a single inch until given an exact and final destination. This uncourageous second life wants to win some undeserved lottery so that it can finally bestow a just and final reward upon itself. No, the second life never wants to write, to speak, or cook, or set the table, or welcome guests with a stranger who might accidentally set us traveling again. This second life doesn't want to leave the door, doesn't want to take any path that works its own sweet way through mountains, doesn't want to follow the beckoning flow of a distant river, nor meet the chance weather, where a path takes us from one discovered world to another. This second life just wants to lie down, close its eyes, and tell God it has a headache. But my other life, my first life, the life I admire and want to follow, looks on and listens with some wonder, and even extends a reassuring hand for the one holding back, knowing there can be no real confrontation without the need to turn away and go back, away from all things, to have things be different, and to close our eyes until they are different. No, this hidden life, this first courageous life, seems to speak from silence in the language of a knowing, beautiful heartbreak. Above all, it seems to know well enough it will have to give back everything received in any form, and even sometimes as it tells the story of the way ahead, it laughs out loud in the knowledge. This first life seems sure and steadfast in knowing it will come across the help it needs at every crucial place, and thus continually sharpens my sense of impending revelation. This first courageous life, in fact, has already gone ahead, has nowhere to go except out the door into the clear stir of morning, taking me with it. Nothing to do except to breathe while it can. No way to travel but with that familiar pilgrim movement in the body. Nothing to teach except to show me on the long road how we sometimes like to walk alone, open to the silent revelation, and then stop and gather and share everything as dark comes in, telling the story of a day's accidental beauty. And perhaps most intriguingly and most poignantly and most fearfully of all, and at the very end of the long road it has traveled, it wants to take me to a high place from which to see with a view looking back on the way we took to get there, so it can have me understand myself as witness and thus bequeath me the way ahead, so it can teach me how to invent my own disappearance, so it can lie down at the end and show me, even against my will, how to undo myself, how to surpass myself, and how to find a way to die of generosity. Amen. So I'll listen to your questions.
We have some time for questions. Any questions from our group today? And if you'll wait for the microphone to come to you, raise your hand tall. Thank you. Mary Jo.
Thank you very much. I came to listen and to hear what you had to say. But last night, when I listened to you on our live stream before, I thought, oh, I'm going to feel guilty, that community member in me. I'm going to feel guilty. I'm going to feel inadequate. I'm going to feel not up to the task and discouraged. I don't feel that way at all. I feel empowered, and I want to thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks be to God.
Other questions or comments?
Can you talk a little bit more about distraction, which I think it's increasing, and I'm not talking about social media and internet. I just think distraction in general is becoming more overwhelming. I'd love to hear some more words on that.
Well, I think it's the lack of connection to our inner selves in a way that allows us to stay focused on what it is we're supposed to be doing, so that we allow ourselves to get called off the path. You know, you catch yourself, you realize when somebody does some small thing and you just get pissed off and stay pissed off all day, that's a distraction, you know, because the thing wasn't worth the amount of energy that you gave to it, and it kept you from doing all the things you needed to do that day because you let that one thing, which was about some ego injury that was teeny tiny, and then the rest of the day is a blur. And we can do something about that. We can choose not to do it. You can say, somebody said something, to me that aggravated me, but unless they spit on me or slapped me in the face or something, that I probably don't need to let the whole day be taken up by that. So I think it has a lot to do with intention. We have to turn our intention toward not being distracted by stuff that doesn't deserve that kind of outlay of energy.
Thank you. Other questions? Dr. Meeks, I wonder if you would please tell us who are the people and what are the ways that we can engage that internal work? It sounds like therapy, it sounds like spiritual direction, but who are the people and how are we invited into that? And also, if you will, when does it become time to share that internal work with others, either others who share some of those same internal communities, or maybe others who don't? How do we move from the internal work to sharing that?
Right, good, thank you. Dreams, I don't know, people pay attention to your nighttime dreams. That's, if you journaling, particularly forming dream groups could be helpful. Journal keeping is incredibly important. Silence keeping is important. We talk way too much. We need to listen to our own hearts and to each other a whole lot more. Therapy, definitely. I mean, all of us I think everybody on the planet needs to be in therapy. That's just, because, I mean, there's just a lot of stuff we need to work on. And if you think you've got it all figured out, you really need to be in therapy. So I think that we could create more spaces within parishes, within the church, where this work could happen. I think the church ought to be engaging this a bit more intentionally, where there's space for people to really get at what's going on with them. I think it's really important to pay attention to who aggravates you. The people who aggravate you the most are your teachers. And paying attention to what is this all about. And maybe if you can't talk to the person who's aggravating you, maybe you could talk to somebody else about the aggravation and try to understand it better. I think that one has to be careful about how much of your inner community you put out into the outer world. I think that we need to create brave spaces where people can tell their truth. And the church ought to be a brave space, but it often is not. And that, to me, is some work that we need to be doing, because the church's job, I think the basic job, is liberation of the heart, liberating the heart. So we ought to make space where people can share that liberating journey. So you have to kind of use some common sense about that and discernment, I think. You don't want to just walk around, it's like you don't want to tell your dream to everybody on the street corner. You want to tell your dream to somebody who will respect dreams, first of all, and who will respect your dream, and who won't try to tell you what the dream means. So I think if we can create those kinds of spaces, then we will begin to create places where we can talk about the stuff we need to be talking about.
Thank you.
Good.
Other questions? Trent in the middle.
So our family has been going through some kind of internal struggles, and it's kind of popped some illusions of mine about us being this wholesome, perfect family. And that's been very painful. It's been like a little death of sorts. And it's really been helpful for me to find spiritual teachers that talk about this downward journey as a redemptive one, as a path that is downward and not to be feared, but to be embraced. And as I was listening to you last night, it was like something clicked. That's kind of what we need culturally in the South. These romanticized image of the noble Southern gentleman, lady, that kind of needs to die.
Right.
And if we could, I'm wondering what the voices are that articulate this cultural downward journey. And I guess that's what I hear you doing, is kind of articulating this cultural downward but redemptive journey that we need to take as Southerners.
I think we're in it at the moment. I think the 21st century is offering us a great opportunity to get rid of the illusions. We are very good at making up the story the way we want it to be and then trying to live as if that's the case. And it isn't the case. And a whole lot of the stuff that's happening, like right now, right in this week, this day, this month, helps us to get rid of some of those illusions. And I think that you can't wake up until the status quo gets challenged. You know, the status quo has to be challenged deeply enough to make you have to reconstruct the story. And then if you choose to do it with truthfulness, you can come out on the other side with some healing. Now, what we've done culturally is just reconstructed it with more lies, oftentimes. So instead of telling the truth, we go fight a war somewhere, we distract ourselves. We come up with a distraction so we don't have to change. And individually, we can try that, but you keep on getting an opportunity to wake up because God is interested in consciousness. You see, God is interested in us being awake and alive and committed. And anything that we do that's not on that path is not going to stand up too well. And that's what we've been doing in this country for all these years, is just we keep on trying to construct a story that was never true in the first place. And then we just kept on, you start lying and then you just got to keep lying. Even if it's, you tell something, that's why it's so much better to tell the truth, because you can't remember sometimes what the lie was. And so you don't know what you need to say next. But we have built a country on a lot of things that were not true. And then we had to keep on trying to reinforce it. So, and then, black people were supposed to be inferior, but then you look at us and we're not. So what do you do with that then? You've been taught this lie, and now you got some evidence in front of you, and what do you do with it? If you're honest, you let go of the lie. If you're not honest, you make up some more lies. And you can keep doing that. I mean, we've been doing it pretty well. So, yeah, we do need to culturally interrogate these mythological things that we've been taught. But you're not going to do it culturally if you don't do it individually, because that's the only way you have the courage. Otherwise, it's too risky. I mean, you can't allow the culture to be deconstructed if you haven't looked at everything that's inside your own heart. Or maybe not everything, but as much as you can see. I mean, all of us are in the dark to a point about ourselves, but to the degree that we turn our intention toward being willing to see, God is so ready to be on that path, because that's what, God's about in the first place, wanting us to grow up and be who we were put on the earth to be.
Thank you. We have time for one or two more.
Get some exercise, Larry.
When you're on this journey, or at least I'll just say I encounter resistance in myself. So I might make some progress looking at, one of my inner community members. And then I say, well, gosh, I've made a lot of progress there. Don't want to make any more progress right now. It's pretty disturbing. I get afraid. So do you have any wisdom, comments on encountering resistance?
Yeah. Well, resistance is a normal thing, So, and that's why it's good to have helpers, spiritual directors, therapists, community support, because then those people can help you, particularly when you get to that point where how much more can I stand to see? I think I need to take a break. And sometimes you do need to take a break. You have to kind of keep the intention, but be willing to give yourself some grace. Grace is a critical piece of all of these constructs, because God's given us amazing grace, and we should have a little grace toward ourselves if we're going to have grace toward other people. So it is a process. It's not going to happen in a minute. It's a whole lifetime. It's a lifetime's work. And so when you start waking up, it's still the rest of your life that you've got to do the work, and it's not going to be done in a day. So to be patient, to be kind, to be willing to allow grace to be a part of your journey. Those are all very important things. And it's not to get off the hook. It is to just not beat yourself to death. Because, you know, if you're dead, you're not going to do the work. So.
Thank you. We have time for one more. Someone willing to be last? Janice, here comes the microphone.
One of my community members refuses to be anything but an optimist.
An optimist?
Uh-huh. And I have 2 daughters, both of whom have lived for a long time, not here. They were born here, but they've lived in big cities. And the reason I'm an optimist is because they and their ilk would much rather live in an area where there's incredible diversity and a lot more opportunity for interplay and relationship with all of these different diversities. And that's why I continue to be an optimist. Not to deny that the problem exists, but I see that perhaps it can and is getting better. Perhaps.
Things are different, let's put it that way. Better is a strange word, and it depends on how you look at it. Because if you look at if you look at where black folks are in the 21st century, we have lost ground in terms of health, in terms of economics, in terms of mass incarceration. So yeah, there's some persona that looks better, but when you get down to looking underneath the persona, you find out that we didn't make the kind of progress that it looks like we made. And it's just important to hold those things. That is the truth. And we are called to live holding stuff, both of which are true. Things are different, and things in some ways are worse. And those are 2 pieces of the truth that one has to hold, and then still have the hope that we can integrate these things, that we can make what looks better really be better. We can make it you know, if you go look at the health inequities and health statistics, you will see that the lifespan of black folks is worse now than it was 20 years ago. So that's not something I can be proud about. But I can be proud about the fact that we're even talking about that, and that we are caring about it, and that folks are disturbed about it. Because 20 years ago, folks didn't care and weren't talking about it. So see, better, sometimes you have to decide what is better. We get caught up, particularly white folks want things to be better, and we who are black have to live with what they are. And we know that, yeah, I have some freedoms, but I have a PhD from Emory, so that puts me in a different category from my sister who lives on disability. So things are better for me because I got through the cracks, I got through the ceiling or whatever, but she's down here. When things get really the way they need to be, things will be as good for her as they are for me in terms of what's out there, what's possible. So, and I just say that to you to say, just be careful and realize that we get called to hold a lot of paradoxical things, and it's hard. And what we choose to do a lot of times is to try not to do that. We want it to be cut and dried. We want everything to be this way or that way, and it ends up to be both ways. That's hard, but it is how it is. God bless you.
Say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Two quick announcements for you. First, before you leave, if you would like to have Dr. Meeks' book, it's for sale over here on my left, your right side of the parish hall. And second, If you're interested in doing this work more intentionally, both internally and externally, our Becoming Beloved community meets every first and third Wednesday of the month at 7 o'clock in the evening in the library. Everyone is invited and encouraged to attend. Thank you, Dr. Meeks.